Hello, my name is Andrew. You can call me Cookies, and here we are with part 2 of Healing in the Eternal Palace on Heroic Difficulty, where we will be starting off with the fourth boss in the instance, Lady Ashvin. So the major mechanic in this fight is it is a major DPS check, including healers even helping out with DPS. Heroic, it's definitely going to be a lot easier, but it's still depending on where your guild is at. This boss can pose a pretty big challenge if you're not doing enough damage. So, the major thing to watch out for is the boss has something called Hardened Carapace, which you can see if you look up here at the top right at my boss frames. You can see a HP bar. I'll rewind it a little bit. You can see above her HP bar there is this colored bar. That is an Absorb Shield that is on the boss. When this Absorb Shield is broken, it will make the boss vulnerable and make her actual HP damageable for a short duration. So essentially what this means is you want to break the carapace, and even healers, because most of the time when her carapace is broken there won't be much healing to do, healers should be helping out with DPS the entire time. As you can see here on my Shaman, I am literally just spamming Lightning Bolt and Lava Burst and keeping Flame Shock off on the boss at all times. There is a small amount of healing that needs to be done, but I'm just letting, our other healers pick that up, like our Disciplined Priests and our Holy Paladin and whatnot. The next major mechanic is going to be where you're going to be wanting to use healing cooldowns and putting in a lot of healing effort rather than damage, but for the most part during this fight you are doing damage to the boss. But this mechanic is going to be Rippling Wave, which I'm just going to fast forward to really quick so we can see where it is. So Rippling Wave, what is going to happen is the boss will do a short cast, and then all these coral that are in the room, there's going to be a bubble that flies out of the coral and travels towards the boss. And when it impacts against the boss, it gives her extra shield HP and damages the whole raid. Alternatively, though, the strategy is you want other players to soak the bubbles that come in towards the boss, and instead then they just do damage to the raid rather than give the boss HP. So, they deal a significant chunk of damage to the raid, so this is where you'll usually have healing cooldowns assigned, or at least be using healing cooldowns if you're pugging or anything like that. And you'll also want to really pump heal here. This is where you would use essences. This is where you would dump some chain heals if you're a resto shaman, or you would ramp up as a disc priest, stuff like that. So Rippling Wave is the major thing to watch out for as far as healing goes. Other than that, there's not much to heal. It's really just do damage to the boss and survive the Rippling Waves. As far as positioning goes to cover the last bit of this boss, you'll want to be kind of loosely spread with your raid, and less mobile classes. Pretty much all of the healers should generally be closer to the boss, as you can see right here, because of this mechanic that comes out that you can see right now going on. This is called Briny Bubble, and what happens is it puts a large circle on 3 players and a debuff. They need to get out of the group because anyone inside of this circle will be stunned after the debuff expires. So essentially what they're going to do is you will see them run out to the side just outside of range of the boss, and they'll stack up with each other since it can't affect other people with the same debuff. And then you'll see they get stunned, and they have a little shield that we have to now break through to break them out of this stun. So if you're a less mobile class or a healer and you don't want to be moving across the entire room when you get this debuff, you'll want to be a little closer to the boss while the more mobile range DPS and whatnot are in the back. That way you can get in position nice and quick without ruining any healing rotation or anything that's going on. And I mean, essentially that's the whole fight. You're going to be dealing with the Briny Bubbles, which is that debuff you run up against the wall with, and then the Rippling Waves, which is where you use healing cooldowns and whatnot. Let me see if I can find a Rippling Wave that we do that does a crazy amount of damage. I'm pretty sure it's towards the end of the fight here. Let's see. So here's probably a Rippling Wave that will do a lot of damage to the raid, so you'll see it is massive damage, and this is where, you just really want to make sure, the whole point of the strategy is you want to kind of alternate when you soak the bubbles. You want to stagger them out so that it doesn't just insta-kill the whole raid, and then you just work with your healers to make sure that you guys are maintaining healing cooldowns going into it and also doing a lot of AoE healing. And that's the whole fight. You survive the Rippling Waves, you DPS the boss as a healer, and it'll help contribute a lot to the group. So that's it for Lady Ashvin. So going over our next boss, which is Gizella. This encounter is honestly fairly easy for healing, at least on normal and heroic difficulties. This is another fight where you can kind of just do a lot of damage until some of the major mechanics start happening and you want to start pumping a little bit more healing into the raid. So the first major thing that we'll talk about is Incubation Fluid. It is a debuff. You can see 3 debuffs on my raid frames right now. It debuffs random players in your raid over time, and it's just a permanent debuff that lasts the rest of the fight that just deals light ticking damage to the player. And then also the debuffed players need to make sure that they are spread out from other players whenever the boss is casting Arcane Current, which you can see being cast right now. So it's just a light amount of ticking damage. It just needs to be kind of healed every now and then, or as more and more members of the raid get it, that's when you'll want to start doing more and more AoE healing. And then here we have the next major mechanic, which is the Zoetroid adds that spawn randomly throughout the encounter. They spawn typically about like 3, possibly 4 times throughout the whole duration of the encounter. Twice in phase 1 and then once or twice in phase 2. And what these do is they deal a moderate burst of damage to the raid. You can see them kind of like doing this little lightning pulse ability, and you'll see the raid take a decent chunk of damage. So that just needs to be healed, and typically while these Zoetroid adds are active, this is where you'll be kind of like chaining healing cooldowns depending on how far in the fight you are. But essentially you just kill the adds, and then they will drop a little puddle on the ground that people with immunities or your tank should be able to deal with. So really all you need to worry about is just, this is where you utilize healing cooldowns, is during the adds, and then just keep people with the Incubation Fluid debuff topped off and kind of steadily healed throughout the fight. And as far as positioning goes on this fight, you're just going to want a light spread around the boss, kind of close to the boss, allowing the debuffed players with Incubation Fluid to kind of stay on the outside edges of the room so that they're nice and far away from the raid. The only other mechanic I guess I'll go over for this fight, since there's not, it's kind of just a repeat after that, just kind of spawning adds, and that's where you heal. And then in between, whenever the adds aren't active, that's kind of where you want to be DPSing, is we will go over the intermission here. I believe, yeah, here it is. So they recently made a hotfix where the intermission happens no matter what at 40% health, so be aware of that. You will not be able to get the boss this low before the intermission. So the boss will run away and you have to run this gauntlet. There's no way of skipping it anymore. So you just have to take your time, dodge these little swirlies on the floor because they knock you up into the air. I believe I get hit once or twice. And if you run into these little circular zones on the floor with the eggs around them, you will get knocked back. So you just want to make sure you're avoiding the knockbacks, unlike me, and get to the bottom of the ramp with the rest of your group, and then it just kind of rinse and repeats from there. The only other new thing is that there's a couple new adds that spawn, but typically on normal and heroic you're not going to really have to deal with the adds, but essentially, just to give a brief explanation, there's a giant add that he does like this ground pound ability that needs to be soaked by some DPS players and possibly healers, just people who are around him, and then there's a caster add that needs to be interrupted, otherwise she stuns the whole raid. And that's the whole fight. So we will go ahead and move on to our next boss. Alright, our next boss is the Queen's Court. This is a 2-boss encounter where the bosses do not share health and they need to die relatively at the same time. So the major mechanics as a healer to deal with is going to be Potent Spark is the first thing, which you're going to see here in a moment. It will spawn 3 orbs within the room that you will see pop up just about now. These Potent Sparks, when they die, they just deal light ticking damage to themselves so that they die over time naturally, but you want to kill them and stagger when they die, as they deal a massive burst of raid-wide damage and debuff the group, increasing the damage you take from further explosions. So you can see here that you'll watch the second orb die here in a moment, and we'll take a nice big chunk of damage to the whole raid. And this is typically where you'll want to be using things like healing cooldowns, like you can see there, that did it, almost wiped our whole raid. So this is where you'll typically use healing cooldowns to counter this ability, and this ability happens just periodically throughout the fight that you can keep track of on timers. The next thing is Form Ranks, which will be, I believe one spawns, we'll just rewind it a little bit, it is these purple zones that spawn in the middle of the room. For instance, this one happens while we're dealing with the Potent Sparks, and all that you want to do is just make sure you're standing, having one person at least stand within each little soak zone, otherwise the raid takes a giant burst of damage, which I think is why actually we take such a heavy amount of damage. I guess that's hard to tell, but it looks like I got that soak, but maybe I didn't. But anyways, you have people stand inside the soaks, and they should just pop some kind of personal, or again, if these soaks happen while the orbs are happening, that is definitely a time to be using a couple healing cooldowns to counter that. The next major mechanic that we're going to be dealing with is Zealous Eruption, which is from Silivaz the Zealous. He will do this cast when he hits 100 energy that you can keep track of on your boss frames. When he hits 100 energy, he does the cast, and then you want to stack underneath him. He'll summon this bubble, and he will deal a giant chunk of damage to anyone outside the bubble. You can see here a couple people get hit by a decent amount of damage because they don't get stacked in quick enough. And I mean, if you take two little chunks of damage from this ability, you're pretty much dead. So stack underneath Silivaz when he hits 100 energy. And then the other ability that he's going to do, since he's like the only one who really does the important abilities on this fight, is he will cast Frenetic Charge on one player, and you just want to make sure that if you're targeted by Frenetic Charge, you stack in the group. Unlike this person is running away. This was the first time we did this boss, so they didn't know, and you get one shot. Essentially what it does is it will split the damage between you, the target, and anyone else within a certain amount of range of you when the charge hits you. So essentially what we did, as far as positioning goes, there's multiple strategies you can do, and like your positioning on this fight is going to be determined based on how your group is doing the boss. But for us, we just had ranged DPS spread out all over the room, and then we would just stack into melee if we got targeted by the charge. So the other option is to have like range stack up away from the bosses, and then have melee run to ranged if they get targeted. But yeah, that's essentially the whole fight. Dealing with the potent sparks is definitely the most important thing in this fight. You definitely don't want to hesitate with cooldowns on that because of the amount of damage that it deals. And yeah, besides that, the other mechanics are pretty minor, or they're very easy to just counter through just kind of playing. So that'll be it to cover Queen's Court, and we'll move on to part 3 of the guide. So thank you very much for watching part 2. If you liked it, leave a like, and I stream every day of the week except for Mondays. I need to correct that because I said Sundays on my last video. I stream every day of the week except Monday, starting at 8:15 p.m. PST. I stream all my mythic raids, all my heroic raids, all my pug raids, all that stuff. I play every healer, and that's all I do. I just play all the healers. So if you're interested in healing content and you would like to ask me questions or just hang out and chat, or check out some of how like the other healers play and whatnot in raids, then come stop by the stream and let me know that you liked the video. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you in part 3 for Zakul and Queen Ajara herself.